I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. We are here on another of our Mail Call Mondays covering our precision rifle workup. Now, last week I talked to you guys about how I load up a ladder test, how we selected our components, and this week I was supposed to come back and tell you what the results were of our ladder test. Well, I hate to tell you, we had a really bad day at the range, and as things sometimes do, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, with the exception of one thing. Well, what we did is we took our ladder test out to the range, and my intent was to set up a target at 300 yards to go ahead and shoot our way through the ladder test, going through our test charges from lowest to highest. What you normally do in a ladder test is you will take the lowest charges that you have, and I will generally load up 3 cartridges with my first charge increment, which in our case was 39 grains. So I'd load up 3 cartridges with 39 grains of H4350, and I would use those 3 cartridges at 100 yards to get the scope zeroed. Now, of course, we bore sight it first because we only have 3 cartridges to get the rifle zeroed. So we bore sight the scope, which is nothing more than looking down the bore at our 100-yard target, getting the target centered up in the bore of the rifle, looking through from the receiver side. Then, without moving the rifle, we would dial the reticle of the scope to correspond with the center of the target. This is usually a very efficient way of getting on paper. If you've got a 12x12 target, you can generally get on that 12x12 with your first shot bore sighting the rifle. So we got the rifle bore sighted in. I went ahead and fired 3 rounds at our 100-yard target. Now, this was the first step when things went totally astray, because when I set my cartridges up in my cartridge box, although I did actually write the charge weight on the side of them, I wasn't paying very close attention. Now, when I loaded the cartridges, I loaded 3 with our starting charge of 39 grains. I also loaded 3 with my target charge, which was 43.5 grains. It just so happened the way that they worked out is our starting charge, 3 cartridges, ended up at the top of the box, and my target charge, 3 cartridges, ended up at the bottom of the box. I wasn't paying attention to what I'm doing, which is a bad thing when you're testing new charges. And I grabbed the 3 from the target charge and used those 3 to zero the rifle. Now, luckily for me, that was a completely and totally safe charge. We already had other shooters that have had their rifles chambered with the exact same reamer and exact same barrel. So we knew that that was a good charge to go to. That, and the charge weight that we were running is not a really hot charge. It's on the warm side, but the target charge is not a blazing hot charge. So I screwed that up. Although I got the scope zeroed, I used all 3 cartridges of my target charge, which meant I had no cartridges left for the target charge to run in the ladder test when we got out to 300 yards. I knew that since I have one above and one below, that I could extrapolate pretty closely where that target charge should have fallen in the ladder test. So we decided to go ahead and run the ladder test at 300, if for no other reason than to be able to show you guys how I run the ladder test. Well, we were testing 2 new pieces of gear while I was doing this ladder test, which is another thing that is not a good idea to do, because if you're testing new gear, it means you haven't worked with it yet, and there are sometimes hiccups in new gear. 2 pieces of gear that I was testing, first of all, was the brand new version 3 Magneto Speed Chronograph. This we will be doing a full review on. This was our first outing with it. And the cool thing about the Magneto Speed Chronograph is it is a magnetic chronograph, and it attaches directly to the barrel of your rifle. So it comes out underneath the barrel of the rifle like a bayonet. You have a small display that you run back, and you can set right next to the rifle, so no glancing down range trying to see the display on your chronograph 10 feet in front of the rifle. And the big benefit on it is if you are trying to get your rifle chronographed on a busy range day, you don't have to go forward of the firing line to set it up. In fact, if you don't want to actually set up a target, you could set up the Magneto Speed on your rifle and bang steel and have it record your shots as you're shooting steel. So it's a really, really slick setup, and through our first outing with it, we really didn't have any problems with it at all. It worked absolutely exactly as described. We got some good velocities on our ladder test. That was where the good part of the day ended. The bad part of the day was it was extremely windy to the point where it kept blowing our 300-yard target stand over. And this is a big, heavy rebar target stand that they have welded out there. They're big A-frame target stands. And it just, we had this large piece of cardboard as our target, and that was just creating enough wind resistance to flip the thing over. Well, the second thing that we were testing was a downrange target camera system that should have broadcast the target image back to my iPad. It was also supposed to record each and every shot that we fired, and my hope was that as I shot, it would send those target images back to my iPad, and I would be able to go forward, and in conjunction with the data off the Magneto speed, I'd be able to get location and velocity for every shot I fired. So I had all this set up. We had checked to make sure that the target camera was running correctly, and then I went ahead and fired our string at 300 yards. Now let me back up. Once we got our scope zeroed at 100 yards for the way you're supposed to do it for your first series of cartridges, so your starting charge cartridges, you'll then want to take that information, hopefully you got some chronograph data off of it, and plug it into a ballistic computer, and it will tell you what your come-ups are for your 300-yard target. So we did this, and we dialed the dope on for our 300-yard target. Now this is estimated dope, and we are shooting on a very, very large target. The target board ended up being probably about 6 MOA wide by 6 MOA tall, and this rifle is definitely capable of shooting better than 6 MOA, so we weren't worried about staying on the target board. If for some reason you have a rifle that you don't think is going to be that accurate, you may want to run your ladder at a little closer, but since this is a long-range rifle, it seemed a good idea to run the ladder at as long a distance as we really could get without wind jumping in and causing some problems. So 300 is where we did it. We dialed our estimated dope on for 300. We aimed for the center dot on our target board, and we went ahead and fired our string of cartridges. Well, at 2 points during the string, the target board and target camera both blew over, so we had to go out and set those back up, so that kind of put a hitch in the process. And then I also found that the target camera was not recording the shot strings. And since we weren't going down and marking the shots, since I didn't have the foresight to run a secondary video camera just to record the whole shot string, we have absolutely no data on which shots are which on the target board. So this really just blew our ladder test out of the water, and it's almost unusable. So we don't have a really good example to demonstrate to you. Now what I will show you is what we ended up with. Now this is the ladder test that we ended up shooting, and what we have here is about a 3.5 inch vertical spread. So just about 1 MOA. We fired every charge from 39 grains to 44.5 grains. And this is what we ended up with. Now, remember, this was an incredibly windy day, so I'm not so much worried about the horizontal dispersion, but the vertical is just over 1 MOA. For every cartridge that we fired. That tells me that I can slap a load in this rifle that is not tailored specifically for the rifle, and it's probably going to shoot sub-minute angle with it. Very, very happy with that, especially since the Mirage was up. And I'll warn you on this, I didn't even think about it when I set it out. This aim point is way, way, way too small for a 300-yard Mirage day. I was barely able to see this through the crosshair. Now I could see it if the crosshair wasn't over it, but when I started putting the crosshair over it, I couldn't tell if I was off on the vertical or horizontal just a little bit because it hid completely underneath the wire of the crosshair. So you really want to do at least a 1.5 or at least a 1 MOA. You could probably get away with 0.5 MOA, but you really cannot get away with a 1/2 inch dot at 300 yards. It makes it really difficult. Even with 20 power, I would have had some problems because of the mirage out there. So this is what we had, and I really would like to have known where exactly my target charge and the 2 on either side of it fell in here, but we don't. What we're going to end up doing, since we know that we're having some issues with the target camera, we will go back and I'm going to rerun this later this week, and I'm going to shoot it the way I normally will shoot a ladder test. Everything else is the same as far as setting the chronograph up, shooting from low to high, watching our loads as we go, and I will have a camera downrange recording the entire string, and that way I can just go back when I pull the board and we come back here to the shop. I'll throw that video up on the computer and I'll play it forward, and as I see the shots, I will mark them. And it's actually almost even better to play it backwards, so you can start out with the full shot pattern, and when a shot disappears you can see which shot that is and you can go in and mark it. That works really well. That's how we've done it in the past, and it's fairly reliable as long as you don't have stuff blowing over. If you do have stuff blowing over, you can set it back up, get the target center back up in the field of view of the camera, and you're good to go. So sometimes the cool electronic doodads really are not the best way to do things. Now, we haven't given up on the target cam. We just have to work with it a little bit more, find out why the Wi-Fi wasn't syncing up real well on it. And it may not be the target cam at all. It may have been my iPad that was causing some issues. So I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not going to talk about that target cam yet until we do some more work with it, because it just wouldn't be fair to the manufacturer. I can tell you the Magneto Speed chronograph is just awesome. We still have a little bit more work to do with it for our final review, but we got some good footage working with it. And really, it's a blast to work with. It's probably one of the quickest chronographs to set up that I've ever worked with. And once you figure out what spacers you need for your barrel, it's really fast. And we tested it on a fairly thin barrel. We tested it on this Remington varmint barrel, and the spacers, the way they work out, we can put it on a suppressor with no problem at all and still get it lined up correctly. So that's good to go. I can't say enough about it, but you'll get the full dump on it when we do the full review. Now back to our load workup, the data that I was able to glean besides muzzle velocity was the rifle's resistance to the charge weights that we had, or how well it handled each one of those charges going up. And what we found was 43.5 is really starting to get to the upper limit of where we have no problems with pressure at all. We don't have any marks on the head of the case, any ejector wipe. We don't have any swelling, any primer flattening, and no primer cratering really to speak with. There's a tiny bit that we normally see with Remington bolt faces, unless you've had your firing pin bushed. The factory Remington bolt faces still have an oversized firing pin, so you will get a tiny bit of cratering. But we had no pierced primers, we had no real primer flow, so really I'm quite happy that the 43.5 showed great promise and we didn't have any problems with pressure on that. Now, we tested all the way up to 44.5. That was as high as I felt comfortable going based upon the pressure that Quick Load was giving me for it, and I was pretty much spot on that, because when we got to 44.5, I have Ejector Swipe, and what Ejector Swipe is the ejector is a metal plunger in your bolt face. When you get a whole bunch of pressure pushing this load back into the bolt face, the brass will flow wherever it can go. Since you have a primer in the middle, then it's not going to flow into the firing pin hole. You may get a little bit of primer cratering where the primer pushes back, but the pressure has to go through the hole, past the anvil, and then hit the cup in order to cause that. What it does do, though, is it pushes this bolt face back, or I'm sorry, the case head back extremely hard against the bolt face. And if you get a lot of pressure, it can actually cause the brass to start to flow back and push that ejector back a little bit into the bolt face. And you'll see this on Remingtons as a circular mark in your bolt head. And if you run your fingernail across the bolt head, when you get to the ejector, you can feel a little thump. When you get into really high pressure situations, then it'll be a very pronounced mark. When it's just over pressure, what you will get is a little swipe. because that flows back into that ejector recess. When you rotate the bolt, the case is still kind of gripping in there, and it will drag the bolt face across that protrusion, and it'll give you a little swipe mark on there. And at 44.5, I was getting just a little bit of swipe across that mark. And the other thing that I noticed at 44.5 is my bolt was just a little bit sticky. When you went to lift it, it took just a little bit more effort to lift. This is why you really need to pay attention when you're shooting through your ladder, because you'll notice at the lower charges, you'll feel how easy it is to lift your bolt and cycle your bolt. Now that's something that you need to record in your brain. That way, as you get to your higher charges, when you go to lift that bolt, if it feels a little bit stickier, it's a little bit harder to lift, then you know you're starting to get into some higher pressures and you need to beware and see what's going on. So at 44.5, we got just a little bit of sticky bolt on it, and that was done. That's where we stopped. Now we were getting at 43.5 grains, we were getting about 2880. And that was our average muzzle velocity. And again, that's with the Magneto speed chronograph, so that's right at the muzzle. It's not 10 foot downrange. And that's a really respectable speed for a 260 shooting the 140 bow-tail hollow points. So I'm kind of happy with that. We get out and shoot another either ladder test, or we may just go out and shoot some groups with our target charge to see where we're at. If we can get some good accuracy with that load, then I think we're going to be good to go. Overall, this rifle shows an extreme amount of promise, since with all those charge weights, I was getting within or just a little bit over 1 minute angle at 300 yards in the wind. That's spectacular for me. I'm really happy with that, because I've said it in the past, for most things that we're going to do at a tactical rifle match, with the exception of cold bore and some paper stages, with most things that we're going to do, a 1 minute angle rifle is going to get it done. And this will definitely be a sub-minute angle rifle when we get done with one match loaded cartridge. So that's really about it for where we're at right now. I apologize to you guys for ginking up the load workup. We'll get back to it though, and we will get you a much better ladder test, and then we'll talk about how to interpret a ladder test. There's really no way to interpret the ladder test that I have, since we don't know what each shot hole corresponds to as far as charge weight and muzzle velocity. So when we get that data, we'll come back and we'll talk about how to interpret a good ladder test. That's it for this week. Since this is kind of a short Mail Call Mondays, we also threw up some of our footage from this weekend's tactical rifle match at Red Brush Rifle Range in Newburgh, Indiana. We had a blast. We had some new shooters that are out there. I tried to get a bunch of different shooters on each stage so that you guys can see the different styles and the different skill levels on it. I will make one comment about it when you watch it. You'll notice that I definitely was not on top of my game while I was shooting. I've told you guys in the past, it's really difficult to get out there and run a camera and make sure that I'm getting some good videography for you guys, and then still concentrate on my game and all the stuff that I need to do. And that really proved true this weekend, because I was forgetting stuff. I wasn't really paying attention to the stage rules, because I was paying attention to getting the camera set up and recording the stage briefing. So it just really was not a good weekend for me. I had a couple of good stages where I had some decent runs, and I had some that I just really blew out my butt. One thing that I will talk to you about, the wrist coach. I've talked to you about these before. You can get these at sporting goods stores. They're made for football players to put on their wrists. It makes a really, really good data card for situations when you're shooting and moving. You can put your dope on here. You can put your target layout on here, and then refer to that as you're going. What I've done in the past is I've done all that stuff on a piece of Write and Rain paper, because I carry a Write and Rain notebook in my gear, and I would slide that in here and I just refer to that. Well, this weekend I tried something a little bit new. I grabbed a dry erase marker and I put my stuff on here with dry erase marker, because it's easy just to write on the window and it's easy to wipe off when you're done. Problem is, it's too easy to wipe off, and on our rooftop stage, I ran up there, jumped into position, and I think I drug my sling across my forearm. and that wiped out about half of my dope. So I really only had the dope programmed into my brain for 2 of the target sets, and because one was very close to it, I guesstimated on that. Of course, unfortunately, that was a target or a hostage target, so a guesstimate wasn't good enough, and I drilled the hostage on that target set. But from there, I learned something, and when I learn anything, I figure it's a win for the match. And what I learned is dry erase markers are not suited to this. One of the other shooters there, he usually uses these kind of setups, and he actually uses a wet erase marker. And what that is, very similar to a dry erase marker, you're right on here, but you can rub across it with cloth with your finger, you know, obviously not really hard, but you can gently rub across it and it won't wipe away the marker. You actually have to use a moist cloth to wipe away your marks. A whole lot better when we're shooting in the dry. Still poses problems if it's raining though, and I'll go back to my write and rain paper and a regular ballpoint pen in the rain. So if you guys decide to get one of these, do not get a dry erase marker. Don't waste your time with a dry erase marker because it can cost you a stage. Get a wet erase marker, or just go with slipping pieces of paper into the wrist coach and doing it that way. So that's your tip of the week, provided for you by the extra ammo that I wasted at this match. Now, if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you've liked this video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next week, get out and shoot!